Hello, I am Heidi Pickett, Chief Business Officer with the TIE, and I would like to welcome you to the TIE Innovator Webinar, What Institutions Want, Insights from On-Chain Behavior and Off-Chain Deals. Excited to be joined today with Brian Trunzo from Succinct Labs and Kyle Ellicott from Stacks Asia Foundation. A lot to dive into today, but before we get started, a quick disclaimer. The information contained in this webinar is for information purposes only and not intended as investment advice. Okay, with that, I think Kyle and Brian both are newbies to our Innovator Webinar series. So let's kick it off with just a round of introductions, a little bit about your background, and you can go a little bit deeper into the protocols you're representing and how you're positioned in the institutional blockchain landscape. Kyle, you want to kick it off with you?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, thank you, Heidi, and to the entire TIE organization for having myself and also Stacks representing today on this conversation and webinar. For those who don't know me, I'm Kyle Ellicott. I am the Executive Director of the Stacks Asia Foundation and participate in a lot of education surrounding how digital assets are evolving from the world of crypto that we knew and store of value to productive assets, along with migrating into capital market structures as well, particularly focusing on the Bitcoin side. And Stacks is one of the original Bitcoin layers. We were one of the first to bring programmability and smart contracts to Bitcoin, to be able to provide applications and future products to be built leveraging Bitcoin stability and security. And today we're focused on that next evolution of Bitcoin and making it a productive and utility-driven asset, and something that can not only have utility, but also look at the world of staking and Bitcoin staking in particular, and everything surrounding the Bitcoin finance space as well.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi. Great to meet you, Kyle, by the way.
My name is Brian.
My name is Brian Trunzo. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Succinct, formerly Chief Growth Officer at Mantle. And prior to that, I was the Global Head of Business Development at Polygon. Been in the space for quite some time. Here at Succinct, we develop core blockchain infrastructure that is focused on scaling and privacy using zero-knowledge cryptography. For the uninitiated, ZK lets you prove that a computation was executed correctly without revealing the underlying data of that computation. So today, our technology secures over 4 billion in TVL across ecosystems like Polygon's Ag Layer and Katana, Mantle, Celestia, and rollups built on the OP stack, and coming soon, the Arbitrum Orbit stack as well. So we sit at the infrastructure layer, and we work with protocols and institutions that need stronger trust guarantees as they scale on-chain.
Nice. So would love to dive into understanding institutional behavior a little bit. But before we really dive into the specifics, let's establish a baseline, which I think would be helpful for everyone tuning into this webinar today. So from your experience working with institutions, whether it's enterprise brands, asset managers, sovereign funds, whoever the player may be, what do institutions actually want from blockchain infrastructure that they're not getting from traditional systems? What are the conversations that are taking place from that perspective?
Brian, I'll let you start.
Sure, yeah. I think there's really two ways to approach this question, one from the business perspective and then two from the tech perspective. So maybe starting with the business side, I think there's this real desire to future-proof oneself and not be left behind. What I see in market is that no institution wants to be the next legacy exchange or market intermediary that failed to adapt to a digital-first environment, particularly when there are new challengers that are arising left and right who are looking to chip away at their business. So they don't want to be made irrelevant and redundant, really. And even if they move cautiously, they want to understand and adopt these primitives as early as they can, as soon as they become as comfortable as they can be with these primitives. And in going down this line of thought, I often think back to ICE in the earlier part of the 2000s. ICE today, of course, owns NYSE, but having burst on the scene as a digital-only energy exchange in 2000, they were the challenger brand at that time. And it took legacy exchanges to adapt over the next decade plus, which was a costly error at that time, of course. And now ICE doing over 10 billion a year in revenue, NYSE making moves into crypto and blockchain themselves. Obviously, you can see how that story plays out from a business perspective. On the tech side, once the product and engineering folks get involved and audit the tech, it often comes down to performance and trust assumptions. Traditional systems rely heavily on counterparties, reconciliation, after the fact enforcement. Blockchain, especially cryptography like ZK, lets you move from this trust-based way of doing business more into math and cryptography, of course. There are trade-offs, of course, mostly on the speed and performance side, and institutions want to make sure that they're getting the right balance between that and the needs of their use case.
And I'll just add on a little bit to what Brian said, which are great points as well, that you've got a lot of institutions that are looking for that digitized flexibility as well, that some of the current systems that they're working with are higher cost. So what we've seen currently with blockchain-based settlements, they're usually lower cost, lower friction, and the cross-border element is unlike anything that we've been able to see to date in those areas that Brian mentioned as well. And I'll add a third category, and that's on the institutional capital or investment side. You've got a lot of investment managers and portfolio managers that now are looking at digital assets across the board that are powered by blockchains as something they have to have. They cannot miss and don't want to be on the wrong side of the decision of having missed an investment opportunity for their respective portfolios that they're managing. You also have a lot of interest around sovereign activity and participation, where some of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world, most notably in Abu Dhabi, are entering into this space in the easiest way that they can, and that's through the public markets. A lot of the spot ETFs, we've seen purchases from that side. You've got sovereign nations that are taking the digital asset space currently, both from a Bitcoin side and also in the stablecoin side, to roll out new economic factors and also a larger, again, potential monetary policy going forward, as well as we're seeing about 15 different nation states with larger than over 100,000 BTC backing them. And again, a lot more on that stablecoin, that future settlement side, all around remittance and payments and future infrastructure as well. So tying it all together from business, technical to financial infrastructure as well.
And Kyle, just to build a little bit off of that, Stacks Asia Foundation, you're focused on institutional adoption across Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, and the UAE, which you just mentioned in terms of like the sovereign wealth funds, particularly in Abu Dhabi. So as you're working with these institutions, particularly in Asia, are they evaluating blockchains differently than their Western counterparts? Are there regional patterns that you observe? How does it differ in terms of as you think about approaching the market?
Yeah, I think from maybe I'll start from the side of maybe differences in terms of patterns. One of the things I've noticed across Asia, we'll just say Asia Pacific, APAC, and the Middle East, but particularly Asia, is the forward thinking and speed around regulatory and policy. Right now, yes, in the United States, we saw a dramatic change in 2025, new administration, new SEC, a big opening and welcoming across all digital assets and stablecoins. A lot of that was pushed forward through the Genius Act and in early preparation for what could be the Clarity Act. But when we look at Asia, we see that there were a lot of lessons learned and a lot of time spent looking at how the industry had evolved. And you look at 3 different countries and now a 4th as of today that really set the stage to how things would be handled across the region, and frankly are setting a stage as to where the expectation is for anyone in the world to have for regulatory and also consumer protection standpoint. You look at Japan and the FSA or the JFSA and how they are looking at handling the regulatory and licensing environment with over 25, almost 30 different exchanges across the country, how they are looking at how assets are being approved in the country, how tax policy is shifting, looking at treating digital assets over 105, currently Bitcoin being the first about a week ago, as financial and security products to actually reduce tax infrastructure from 55 down to 20%. A massive milestone in Japan that just changed within about a year's time publicly as we've seen these announcements coming through. Also in Asia, you're seeing a lot more forward progress around licensing and regulatory environment around stablecoins. Japan leading that effort with the JPYC, the first yen-backed stablecoin to be approved and licensed throughout the country. Today, actually, it was just announced they're going to be integrating that with Line, the major social app across the country. You have Korea that is making strides in all areas. And from the institution side, for those who might not be aware, for many years, about 9 going on almost 10 years, Korea has actually had in place a ban for financial institutions and institutions alike to be able to participate in digital assets. And that has now actually completely been lifted. And so over the 2025, we saw a phased roll out of that approach. And in 2026, it's now completely an open field. So now institutions, in addition to retail, are able to participate in this environment in a way that we hadn't seen. And the government is not just looking at the Genius Act and what happened in the US, but also their own policies and what can be particularly applied at home. So now you have a lot of pilots with won-back stablecoins that are coming out, and also new policies on how institutions, public companies will be able to participate in digital assets for their shareholders and future shareholder gains. And the next two, Hong Kong and Vietnam. Hong Kong has very long been forward in the digital asset industry. And most recently today, they just announced that they will be rolling out full licenses for stablecoins within the country. These are going to be likely financially backed by banks and large institutions in the country, which will be exciting to see. And then last but not least, Vietnam. Vietnam last year made big news that they were going to be opening up to the world of digital assets. And with that, made one of the first licensed and regulatory approved exchanges with the military bank and Upbit. This was before Upbit was acquired by Naver in Korea. And then today, after some successful pilots in the country, they are actually going to roll out licenses for more exchanges and more to happen across the digital asset industry. So you just look at those 4 countries as an example. You've got financial banks or mega banks within each of those countries stepping in to launch these initiatives. Institutional capital now able to flow directly and through public equities or structured products. And then third, you have some of the most progressive policy and regulatory environments that exist almost anywhere in the world. And the only next from there outside of the US is Abu Dhabi and Dubai, the UAE. Abu Dhabi's ADGM has one of the most progressive frameworks for foundations, the DLT framework, that took very similar stance as what we saw in Asia. And I just mentioned lessons learned, what worked, what didn't work, what made a very good foundation, a clear token structure, a clear ecosystem, and what didn't. And from that built the DLT foundation for really putting forward the best and the brightest when it comes to technology, policy, and later technology. And we're seeing the same thing in Dubai with VARA and its licensing structure as well. And just for transparency, the Stacks Asia Foundation is a DLT foundation as well. And so I've had a chance to actually explore a lot of these different foundations as well. So in Asia, right now, you see the mega banks, you see institutions, and you see regulatory clarity moving faster than its counterparts in the US. And Heidi, I'll just close with one more thing before I turn over to Brian. Why this is very important, I'm hitting on this very clearly. All of what I just mentioned was all in the works last year. And some of these headlines just dropped this week as we kick off 2026. But if you compare it to the mega banks and their counterparts in the United States, every single one of them right now is playing catch up. And you can see that in the first 10 days of 2026, as you see JP Morgan coming out announcing that they will support Bitcoin as collateral in one part of a small part of the bigger division in the entire bank. You see BNY Mellon coming out. You see Bank of America saying their entire their CIO and their entire wealth division supporting 1% to 4% allocation in public equities and structured products surrounding digital assets for their client portfolios. You also see Vanguard for the first time coming out, not just supporting, but also taking positions in companies that we've seen like Strategy and others as well. So this wave is really starting to welcome up. And last but not least, you have Morgan Stanley come out, very similar to Vanguard. So the US mega banks are realizing they have to play catch up before the Clarity Act is put into place so that they're ready to roll out. Whereas Asia is already far ahead, and we're seeing a lot of that play out today.
Really appreciate those insights, particularly from you coming from the ground. I think that's super interesting to hear. And yeah, we've been talking about the US, coming out as a leader again, with under the new administration. But yeah, I think there's still some catch up to do across the board.
Absolutely. And some of these countries, just back to Vietnam for a second, Vietnam is actually the fourth fastest growing in terms of adoption market in the world right now. You've got over 30 million people. You've got countries like Pakistan that also sits up there. You've got Turkey, which is the largest stablecoin market by volume right now. A lot is happening in that region that doesn't get highlighted and talked about, but it is two very different worlds that are competing, but in a good way of more of collaboration, because they're pushing each other in these regulatory frameworks to make sure that consumer protection is first and foremost. Second, the infrastructure, as Brian, I'm sure, is about to mention right now, is sound and stable for the scale of tens of hundreds of millions of people. And that lastly, institutions and mega banks are actually able to come in a clear, transparent way to support those other two buckets so that we can see that potential digitized infrastructure in the future as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue. Brian, let's bring you back into this conversation. So Succinct tweeted towards the end of last year about your 2026 focus, particularly on financial institutions, government agencies, Fortune 500s, really around enhancing data privacy, compliance, clearing processes. Can you talk more about, the driving interest? How are these conversations playing out? How do they differ from crypto native use cases? Sort of building on, kind of the conversation we've had so far.
Yeah, I think it first starts with the technology that we build and provide ZK and understanding a little bit more about it. There's nothing about ZK that makes blockchain necessary to the usage of the technology. Indeed, ZK has existed long before Satoshi ever wrote his white papers. So ZK actually predates blockchain. It just so happens that it's extremely well suited for blockchains because you're constantly proving something. You're proving state transition functions. You're proving the state of the ledger off chain and then posting that data on chain. And of course, ZK rollups have had most success within the Ethereum ecosystem. And that's because Ethereum itself, from the Ethereum Foundation, has this rollup centric roadmap that really accelerated demand for us and the usage of our technology. But you're also seeing other sorts of rollups like optimistic rollups see demand as well. Folks like Robinhood and Coinbase making their announcements. Obviously, Coinbase with Base already in production for some time now. But seeing a lot of public chains serving the banking and payments use cases, such as Polygon, Arbitrum, and Mantle. So we found this product market fit within blockchain, but there's nothing unique about ZK that requires blockchain. So what's changing now is that we're seeing folks come around to the idea of using ZK for other sorts of computation that needs proving, ways of moving data elsewhere and proving it and not providing any details about that data. So right for this is identity, compliance, exchange integrity, concepts that are sort of part and parcel with the institutional landscape. So what we're seeing is proving KYC without revealing personal data or proving exchange internal logic like auto deleveraging or margin calculations are running properly. And really, since the events of 10/10, when many of in the money positions were liquidated, somewhat surprisingly to market participants that didn't understand auto deleveraging on these perps exchanges, this has become an even hotter topic. So part of our strategy is to work the top of the funnel, expose the technology to some of these institutions who might find great use for it, who have shown an appetite to get involved in blockchain in one way or another, and figure out other ways that they can be using blockchain and blockchain adjacent technologies like ZK to further future-proof their businesses and move further on chain.
And are you focused on any particular region, or kind of everywhere works for you?
Yeah, we are a small team. We're about 30, 35 people, mostly engineers and product folks, math PhDs, cryptographers. So our reach is somewhat limited in that regard. We're based in San Francisco. I myself am in New York. So we're very sort of like America-centric. But something that I wanted to talk about a little bit on this webinar at some point, and I'll probably talk about it a little bit more later, are our channel partnerships with what we call RAS providers, roll-up as a service providers, these implementation providers who are building these roll-ups and who are also using the ZK technology to figure out other use cases. They're tip of the spear for us. They're in market, and they're the ones that are having a lot of these up close and personal conversations globally that further expand our reach. So that's our way of addressing the global demand and need while staying a little bit more US-centric due to resource limitations.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Kyle, did you want to add something?
No, I think that's it's pretty on point. I'm excited to hear what Brian has to say in terms of his partnerships. What he and the team are working on is very fascinating, and the area of infrastructure and also privacy and those worlds starting to come together is a leading topic here in 2026. Something we've been talking about as an industry for a very long time. And as Brian said, it's not new technology with some of the stuff that they're working on, but it is being applied in a very unique way, and they're doing a great job of leading that effort right now.
I'm happy we can dig further into the partnerships right now. I think that makes a lot of sense, just kind of continuing on this. And so, Brian, I mean, you mentioned sort of spanning the partnerships with like Arbitrum, Mantle, Polygon, Aglayer, a bunch of others, essentially the major Ethereum scaling ecosystems. So how do you approach evaluating these partnerships? What strategic factors drive your selection process? Kind of maybe give some examples around that front.
Yeah, no two deals are the same, I would say. I think there's obviously a desire to work with those who are looking for real solutions to real problems. Obviously, at the top of the funnel, folks are exploring proofs of concepts and pilots, and oftentimes there's the allure of a big name that you might want to attach your name to generate press and garner interest and start that interesting and vicious loop of demand gen and lead qualifying and nurturing, of course. But we always want to see some substance underneath. So with that, we're really fortunate that we have counterparties that find our work intellectually demanding. So there's usually a way of finding substance and wrestling with ZK. It's kind of hard to operate in the ZK space and be so far over the horizon doing like vaporish kind of things and just making announcements for the sake of announcements. There's really a lot of intellectual heft there. So to nurture interest usually requires having some sort of a stakeholder internally who's a champion of the technology, who is thinking a little bit more further downfield of what they can do with that technology in a real way. And where we saw some of this intellectual curiosity bring more fruit, if you will, to partners that we've worked with and now are working with, was after we had launched our OP Succinct product, which enables one to use the OP stack, which is one of the most used stacks in the Ethereum ecosystem for launching chains, using that stack to tack on ZK to that stack, because again, that stack originally was for optimistic rollups only. And in seeing great demand here and seeing a lot of products go in production into mainnet, we saw a lot of interest come inbound on what we could do potentially with the Arbitrum stack. Folks started asking like, hey, can you guys develop a similar product for Arbitrum Orbit chains? So, we worked with the Arbitrum team, highly technical team, an amazing team to work with. And in so doing, again, that intellectual curiosity sort of like kicked in, and they started kicking around new and novel cryptographic ideas to make the stack more efficient. So from an engineer's perspective, that made the partnership even more rewarding. And earlier I had mentioned the rollups as a service provider. So I want to mention them again here, because they're the ones that are really wrestling with the technology and are deepest into the technology, because they have these relationships with these enterprises and with these public chains where they're standing up the architecture and they're running the architecture for them. We work with them very, very, very closely on developing new ideas and understanding what's needed in market. And the feedback that we get from them helps in turn with our selection process. They know which teams are looking to create new and novel ideas and are building real solutions, as opposed to those who might be a little bit further offsides, just playing around with the technology, either for press purposes or for less substantive purposes, if you will.
And I get every partnership deal is like a little bit different, probably a little bit nuanced, but like sort of from like the time to close or the time to like put that partnership in place, is there like a standard amount of time, or like what does the cycle look like?
I wish there was a standard amount of time, because I'm a bit of a boomer on the BD side. Like, I love a good CRM and a dashboard, and I love to see how deals are pacing and just sort of like measure conversion rates and you kind of throw a lot of that out the window in crypto. I still think it's very important to monitor and understand what's lapsing, what's stagnating, like how you can move a deal through the pipeline. But at the end of the day, this is such a nascent space, and people are still getting used to sales cycles here. And people are taking their time and kicking the tires on all the solutions in the space. On the ZK rollup and more general rollup side, the Ethereum side, sometimes we can forget that there are other solutions out there. There's other great solutions out there. Folks are launching their own L1s. There's really great non-Ethereum aligned ways to launch chains, from Avalanche subnets to Cosmos. So it makes for a very complicated and complex cycle, and it should be no surprise, I guess, that the most serious teams and the teams that you want to work with the most and who understand this the best, they're the ones who are diligencing you, your competitors, and all the other options out there the most. And just because you think you have the best solution, it doesn't necessarily mean that solution is fit for purpose for some of these institutions, as everyone has different needs. So it makes for a real dynamic sales cycle. And there's no two deals look the same, really.
And what do you lead with in terms of like, why should they work with Succinct Labs over some of the other solution providers? If you could like kind of maybe summarize, here's 3 reasons why you should think about working with us.
Yeah, I think one is how plug and play our technology is, how easy it is to stand up our technology. And, we have over 4 billion in TVL that's secured by our technology in mainnet. And we can point to real examples of folks that are using the technology. A second thing that we often lean on is the inheriting security from Ethereum, not having to pay a security budget to stand up your own L1. When you stand up an L1, you need to emit tokens for validators to incentivize them to run the infrastructure, to secure the chain. With rollups, particularly ZK rollups, you don't need to do that. You inherit your security from Ethereum. That lands really, really, really well. You marry that and couple that with the ease of standing up the infrastructure and the fact that we have so many good examples in mainnet production, and that makes for a pretty compelling argument. And then finally, in and around this space, Ethereum has done a really good job in I was going to say recent years, but it's really the last like 8 or so months. Ethereum has had more wind in its sails, if you will, with institutions. Particularly within the payments and stable space. So there's sort of this natural draw and energy pulling people into Ethereum. And once they get there and they start to see the options, ZK rollups are pretty easily something that they can grok and sort of jumps to the top of their list of things they're diligencing. So I would say those are the 3 things that sort of are at the top of conversations as we pull people through the pipeline.
And one more question, promise, Kyle, I'm going to bring you back into this. Just, privacy has been a pretty good narrative, pretty strong narrative of recent, like how much do you rely on those narratives being top of mind as you're in this space? Can you contribute directly to keeping that narrative alive, or is it just here to stay because privacy is something that is important to everyone?
Yeah, I think in general, that is usually like great jiu-jitsu or knife fighting for pulling a deal through a pipeline, right? When there's a really sensitive and powerful topic in market that is drawing a lot of interest, you want to leverage that and you want to build products around it and you want to showcase it. But with privacy is so all-encompassing and so powerful and such a big idea that I don't know that anyone needs to necessarily showcase too much to get a fish on the line or to start reeling in it a little bit more, so long as they're doing something with privacy. I often joke around that I can't believe that crypto has gotten this far without baked in, like, layer zero, deep down the stack privacy everywhere. It's kind of crazy that we've been able to get as far as we've gotten without like instantiated privacy everywhere. So yeah, privacy is a unique one because while I do think it's good best practice and hygiene and it doesn't matter what industry you work in, institutional, enterprise, if you're in sales or BD, to use that as a technique, point to the topic du jour to start pulling people through the pipeline. Privacy is a unique one where it's so powerful, and I think it's here to stay, and everyone just gets it immediately that you can do quite well by having a privacy product and market to bring people through your pipeline.
And just to add on to that, Heidi, some of the institutions that I've been talking to, or we've been talking to at Stacks, are looking at privacy as the expectation, not the exception, going forward. So whether it's a corporation or whether it's a financial institution, a mega bank, or just an institutional investor, that privacy angle, which to Brian's point, it's a very big, encompassing word. We're starting to see that evolve into various areas of not just the technical or infrastructural stack, but also the end consumer and how that may play a role as well. I mean, on the Bitcoin side, we saw Zcash really take off in the second half of 2025. But more importantly, as institutions start to go into digital assets, not just stable coins, but digital assets as a whole, they're going to want and require, and again, expect that there is a level of privacy when it comes to transactions, maybe when it comes to wallet addresses, when it comes to identity, that we have not seen yet in this industry at a scale that we're going to be talking about. And again, it's going to be expected. If I'm a financial institution that's looking to make hundreds of millions of dollars of investments into digital assets, I'm not going to want that publicly displayed in any one spot. And so finding ways to further provide privacy in those types of transactions now and in the future is, I think, why we've started to see the change over from privacy being just a quick narrative, or in some respects of the industry, a very long standing narrative that has been built up on that infrastructural stack, to now again being an absolute requirement and being included in every conversation, whether it's in with C-suite, whether it's in with family offices, or it's on panels and discussions like this. Privacy is what matters. And lastly, as we start to look at these stable coins coming online, whether they're localized currency backed or one of the top two, whether it's USDC Circle or USDT Tether, again, privacy is going to be expected. People are not going to want their individual transactions when they go buy a coffee or when they go buy a home, or they start to use their assets they've held as a portfolio piece to then be used as collateral and all of that to be shown. There is going to have to be some level of further detailed privacy, which tons are working on. It's now going to have to be included in these applications and in these processes as well.
Great. And Kyle, continuing with you, so Stacks also is building some interesting relationships, particularly around the custody side with like BitGo, Hex Trust, Copper, and Circle's X Reserve integration. So like, how do these partnerships validate sort of the Bitcoin L2 infrastructure for institutions?
Yeah, first and foremost, a massive growth for an validation for the maturity of the Bitcoin side of the entire industry. Prior to 2024, which is when we really saw that entire Bitcoin layers infrastructure expand at mass. Before that, there wasn't a lot of focus and acceptance, or really emphasis, I should say, put on the Bitcoin side of the industry outside of BTC and a few assets. Most investors, institutional otherwise, hadn't had that much demand for some of these products that we're now seeing play out, because a lot of the efforts of Stacks, Babylon, Core, and many others that have built up that infrastructure and brought in a lot more consumers. And a lot of that goes to Bitcoin changing. Bitcoin for so many years was just a store of value. You look at the first 12 years of Bitcoin, it was just a store of value. That's how everyone referred to it. That's how many looked at it. Digital gold, you name it, there's plenty of terms. And from 2021 to 2024, we started to see that infrastructure grow. And when infrastructure starts to take more users or institutions or retail traders, the like, all start to make their way in, they need somewhere to go. And so we were very fortunate to be a part of that maturity of the industry and supporting and educating with our partners what is going to be required. As we began to see in 2024 and then most recently in 25, how Bitcoin started to shift from that store value to having utility to now having productivity, meaning that it could be used as a income generating or yield generating asset in ways that had only been hoped for or idealized previously, but had already accepted in the Ethereum, the Solana, and the many other ecosystems that were built off of EVM and even the Move ecosystems we just hadn't seen yet. So we worked with a lot of these partners that you noted around the custody space to talk about what are those holders who have BTC, who have Bitcoin related layer assets. What are they going to require? And through those discussions, we were able to put together some very exciting product offerings in partnership with our partners. And on the custody side, again, that's number one. You've got an asset, whether that's STX like Stacks, or that's Baby like Babylon, or that's BTC being Bitcoin. And no financial advice, please do your own research. These are just call outs. But if you had any of these assets, again, where are you going to hold them? And then once you hold them, what more can you do with them, right? By design, Stacks has the unique staking mechanism to yield back BTC. And a lot of institutional investors have demand for that. And then furthermore, once we saw that start to take, we have for more than 5+ years now, and over hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin provided back to those investors across the board. When Babylon started to introduce an early version of Bitcoin staking, and then Core with dual staking, and the entire world of tokenized assets, meaning wrapped, minted, or otherwise, started to come up, we saw in the second half of 2024 the rise of all of these assets and people wanting to do something. Just for those listeners, we went from 0 Bitcoin staked, BTC is what I'm talking about here, to Babylon bringing in over, I think, 50,000 plus Bitcoins to their network and protocol for initial staking. Core brought in more, we brought in more as Stacks, and all of these tokenized assets brought even more to the pile. That suddenly showed our partners who we worked with and many others that Bitcoin as an industry had matured. And all of us needed to look at how to support that growing infrastructure as we went through a very experimental phase from 2021 through 2024. But now in 2025 and 26, it is there. And I'll add one more data point. You've got 2.5 million, that's about 12% of Bitcoin's total supply sitting in financial products and ETFs. That Bitcoin is sitting idle. It is dead capital on many books right now, and it is looking for a place to go. With all of these efforts, including SBTC at Stacks and also many other minted assets, we have shown that there are tens of thousands of Bitcoin that is looking to be productive and have, again, a yield generation or income generation world built off of that through staking and other financial products as well. So we've worked with the base infrastructure. Now we're looking at that next level of infrastructure is how do we go from working with custodians, exchanges, and wallets, multi-sigs, and others to then we're welcoming in the world of self-custodial and providing that next layer of openness for custodial to the end user, whether they're institutional or retail as well, and working into that next bigger piece of Bitcoin on Bitcoin staking as well.
So if I hear you correctly, you've come a long way, but you're just getting started.
Very much. I'm sorry for so much history. I think it's just very foundational to understand these three kind of eras that Bitcoin has evolved in. Brian did a great job of laying out what's happening across the Ethereum, EVM, and even Solana ecosystem and arbitrums as well. The Bitcoin side is a little bit more complex because we had a lot of this not really happen for almost 14, 15 years. And Ethereum and Solana and many others really took the lead on building that foundation of what was possible in cheaper, faster, and scalable infrastructures. And then we saw it all come back and start to look at Bitcoin as a direct or as a supplement infrastructure that could be supportive as well. And it's really exciting to see how all these ecosystems have come together now to empower over 2 trillion. We added Ethereum, almost another trillion, and Solana as well. You've got $3+ trillion of assets that are now empowering, and we're just getting started, as you said.
Before we move on, Brian, I just want to see if you had a reaction to that.
Yeah, I have a very general reaction and like a funny quip, I guess, or maybe it's not a quip, but it's something that might sound like a non sequitur, but I think it's very applicable here. I love the phrase "know the source material." It's a phrase that comes from the art world, from the fashion world, and it's a phrase that's used to say like, hey, you might see this thing out here that seems relevant to you that you really like. But like, how did it get that way? Like, what's the source material? Like, what's the ground zero? How did this happen? What's the lore behind it? And I often feel like people in the institutional space, particularly those who are on the Ethereum side of the fence, who are working through the L2 landscape, maybe they're building their own L2 or they're tokenizing on an L2 or they're tokenizing on Ethereum. Oftentimes they are completely blind to Bitcoin. So whenever I talk to Bitcoiners, myself a Bitcoiner, but when I talk to people who are working in the Bitcoin space, I often like to hear the lore again, because I can go like a year without hearing it. And if I can go a year without hearing it or discussing it, I feel as though those in the institutional space certainly aren't getting that education. So I love hearing it from Kyle. That's great.
Thank you, Brian. And I'll just add on to Brian's point. All this work that was just getting started, and many ecosystems, including Stacks, participated. And without others, this all couldn't be possible. Laid a big foundation for what, again, we saw in 2025 with public markets and capital markets and structured products. And the amount of assets that have moved in, the openness of supportive infrastructure had to be improved. And so many worked and contributed to that improvement. And now, as we just saw a big announcement around not just real world assets, but also tokenized real world trading as well, and the 24/7 markets that are going to start to open up, all of these are building blocks leading up. And all of us have contributed to it. And we're just very excited to be a part of that conversation at Stacks.
Nice. Changing gears a little bit, maybe we should just talk a little bit about on-chain data, some of the metrics that you all look at and hold yourselves accountable to. Sort of what are the key KPIs? I guess I said key twice, but what are the KPIs that really reveals institutional behavior patterns? And how do you monitor and gauge institutional interest and like adoption momentum? Maybe just kind of throw it out there. I mean, I know, Brian, you dropped the 4 billion in TVL. Is that the only metric that you look at and care about? But, how do you think about this from a data perspective and really the
from an internal perspective, seeing how much TVL is secured with our technology is obviously something that we look at. And it's also a nice eye-popping number at the top of funnel when you're bringing people into the technology. Other things that we look at are number of proofs that are being generated, like how much our technology is actually being used. We see this on the RWA side. It's like an analog, right? Like folks will tokenize a large sum in TVL, but then it's not productive. There's no transactions there, right? So an analog would be, okay, there's a lot of TVL that's secured with our technology, but how many proofs are being generated? Like how many transactions are coming through? So those are some internal things that we look at. Externally, some of the things that we look at in terms of adoption and where we want to focus our interests, I think they're pretty obvious. But gotta state it. Looking at big names that are coming on chain, right? Like staying very relevant on the conference circuit and sort of like on the news grind, if you will. With that, there's also the regulatory side. There's no coincidence that after the Genius Act was passed in July, that firms like Stripe and Circle and Tether would come on chain, right? Like that's like pretty obvious in retrospect. Laying in wait, planning, and being ready to make those announcements. But getting back to what I was saying about the conference circuit, and maybe this is a really good plug for ETH Denver Innovate, so I'll throw that out there. But you really see at the conference circuit some soft signals and some signals that aren't so soft. They're pretty hard actually. Of what's happening, where the zeitgeist is moving. So I think back to the summer and even before the Genius Act was passed, right? If anyone was at ETHCC, you'll remember just how powerful that Robinhood Arbitrum announcement was. I mean, it basically sucked all the energy out of the room, and it was all anyone can talk about all week. And then that lingered straight through the Genius Act being passed and kind of propelled us to all-time highs at the end of the summer. And I really do think that Robinhood's announcement was a huge part of that. And for us, in looking at where the opportunity is, we were looking at that announcement. And as I had said earlier in the conversation, folks were coming to us, asking us if our OP Stack technology, the ZK rollups that we provide for those using OP Stack, if that technology could be used for Arbitrum Orbit chains. And seeing that inbound plus this huge announcement that Arbitrum had secured a deal with Robinhood, obviously that poured some fuel on the fire for us to figure out those novel cryptographic issues that would need to be solved for us to bring our technology to the Arbitrum stack. And that really motivated us to do a deal with Arbitrum. Yeah, those are some of the soft signals, some of the harder signals, internal KPIs that we have, and then external things that we're seeing.
Thank you for the plug for Innovate Denver, February 18th. Kyle, how do you guys think about metrics and traction and adoption on the institutional front?
Yeah, just adding on to similar metrics that Brian mentioned, is I think we all do across the industry, looking at very similar ones. I think things are evolving from a TVL perspective as we're starting to see that capital kind of diverge a little bit, because you have more stable coins that are starting to enter onto chain, which is driving more users, more activities, more wallet creations. But also for us on the Bitcoin side of the house, we've got a metric of Bitcoin capital. What kind of Bitcoin is coming on chain, and what Bitcoin, to a word that Brian used as well, is around productivity. How is Bitcoin being used, and where is it being productive versus sitting idly? And so when Bitcoin comes into the ecosystem, that's a great metric. But then also, what does it do once it's on? When it's in the ecosystem? Is it going into applications? How is it being used in terms of productivity, from staking or from new use cases like lend, borrowing, and loans to much more around kind of the DeFi side of the house as well. So for us, we're looking at all the same things as many others, but we're now looking more heavily at welcoming in that new Bitcoin capital, which is driving some of these higher level partnerships and also new infrastructure build outs because of that 2 trillion in capital, wanting to be able to support that increase demand as it comes. So Bitcoin capital is a big area that we look at. So Bitcoin coming on chain, and then it being productive as well, and how we can help bridge that productivity and what is necessary to add into the stack for them.
Nice. In our remaining time together, I would love to hear a little bit about some of the foundation, some of the key developments from 2025, since I think we're still early enough in 2026 to sort of hear a couple of those highlights, and kind of how is that positioned you for your roadmap? What can we expect? What should we be paying attention to as we think about Succinct Labs and stacks? And you can talk about the market, more broadly, but would love to just hear a little bit from each of you on that side.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I had mentioned previously, more generally, using ZK technology outside of blockchain, outside of building blockchains, L2s, if you will. In having that realization, we were looking at the zeitgeist, and something that we couldn't help but notice was how the internet is basically collapsing under an avalanche of AI fakes, and how difficult it is to determine whether what you're seeing online is real or not. Like our benchmark for what is real has been kind of like shattered. And some of the technologies that we're seeing in market right now is just this like recursive loop of AI, like detecting AI, and the AI keeps getting better. So there's this cat and mouse game of determining what you're seeing is real or not online. And we've found ways to use our technology to provide cryptographic proof that something is indeed real, that it was taken by a piece of hardware at a certain time and unaltered at the sensor level of the camera before the image is even published, right? So it's not about detecting AI fakes, it's about strengthening reality itself and proving that these images and media provenance is real. So a little bit of a departure from the conversation we're having about institutional use cases for ZK, and kind of like moving towards enterprise. But this is something that we feel extremely strongly about, and we can see how this use case can actually affect and be used within the institutional space. I mean, just imagine a very convincing deep fake of a CEO making some statements about his company, or a regulator going rogue that can crash markets or wipe out billions of dollars off of a balance sheet or off of a market. And it takes time for truth to catch up, even if that truth is 5 minutes, 10 minutes, right? To catch up, there are people who can arbitrage that AI falsehood, or AI generated falsehood, if you will. So a bit of a left turn there in terms of some of the things that we're working on, but I'd be remiss not to mention it because it's extremely exciting for us. And we do see this use case as being far reaching and touching everything, including institutional.
2025 was a big year for us on the Stack side and the Bitcoin side of the house, as we launched SBTC just at the end of 2024, rolling into 2025. And throughout the year, in 3 different caps increases, we saw over 5,000 Bitcoin enter into the ecosystem and mint SBTC and start to earn a yield and be productive for the first time. And that was a foundational release for us as an ecosystem and for the entire technology that had been built years prior. To see that vision of Bitcoin being more than a store of value and being a productive asset really start to come true. We also got the chance to see the beginning of a dual staking mechanism and product of what that would look like when you blend STX or Stacks staking with Bitcoin staking, and what that power would lead to into 2026, which I'll mention in a moment. But we also saw stablecoins come online, not just Bitcoin-backed stablecoins like Hermetica, but also we saw USDC. So we saw Circle come to Stacks with USDCX and more integrations to follow, and a lot of partnerships, as you already noted, Heidi, on the custody side. We listened to our regional investors and partners and said, what are we missing? What do we need? And we started to integrate those custodian partners, those wallet partners, and that hardened infrastructure around multi-sig and others, and saw the first exchange come to partnership, Gate.io, to allow for SBTC to be traded. And that, again, just showed the power of what Bitcoin could be for many as something more than a store of value or just an idle sitting asset as well. And all of this builds on the heels of what we're looking at here in 2026. I know Adriano, the CTO for Stacks, was on just recently, and I'm sure to put a lot out there. I'll say what we're focused on and what I'll be focused on a lot this year is going to be around that bigger piece of Bitcoin staking. How do we look at Bitcoin on Bitcoin staking and what it means when we start to unlock not just the 2.5 million Bitcoin that sits in structured and financial products, but how do we look at really starting to make the rest of the Bitcoin out there productive? How do we take it from a dead idle capital asset that sits in portfolios to something that is productive, so that the Bank of Americas, the Vanguards, and the mega banks around the world look at this as something that they have to have in that bigger piece of their product portfolio for their wealth management and financial clients across the board. If the biggest banks in the world are looking at 1% to 4% allocation, how do we get a part of that story? And so we're looking very heavily at that. And Bitcoin and Bitcoin staking is one. Self-custodial and the idea of Bitcoin ownership and privacy is going to be a big lead up in the future. And on the heels of SIP 31, a big governance proposal that we had last year, new capital coming in, more expanse around the industry. I think with what Stacks Labs, the endowment, and us at the Asia Foundation and more are putting together is going to make a very exciting year ahead. And my personal prediction for the year is that we see about 10% of that 2.5 million Bitcoin that sits in public equities and structured products today. I think we see about 10% of that by the end of the year start to be productive and no longer sitting idle. And that's productive into protocols and applications that we talked about today.
Nice. Any final words, anything we didn't cover that was like, I need to make sure I share this on this webinar? If people want to learn more about Succinct Labs or Stacks, what is the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, succinct.xyz or Succinct Labs is the handle on Twitter. You can reach out to me directly, Brian with an I. So Brian at succinct.xyz. Be happy to hear from you.
And for us, Stacks.co, at Stacks on Twitter, StacksAsia.org on Twitter as well, or on X. And then you can reach out to me, Kyle Ellicott, anytime via DMs or otherwise, and be happy to chat with you. But Stacks.co is the first place to start.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brian and Kyle, for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for joining in, and wish you both best of success for a great 2026. A lot on the agenda, and look forward to watching success and new milestones and catching up with you both soon.
Amazing. Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you.
Likewise.